guys have been in a series on the need of community. And I just want to talk today about a need that you have inside of community. This is something that I hold very dear to my heart. It's something that I learned in my late 20s, early 30s. I am still in my early 30s, so I am still learning. Because it's a hard thing to do in friendship. But it is a need of ours that God created us with. And I'm going to break it down through the life of a friendship with Jonathan and David. How many know of Jonathan and David in the Bible? Yeah? Praise God. So most of you know the story, but this last few weeks I've just been diving deep into their friendship. And a key theme that I see in their friendship is vulnerability. And our generation, young adults, those younger than us, vulnerability, my mom and dad don't know what vulnerability is. I've never seen them do vulnerability. So I can attest that maybe vulnerability has never really been displayed. And so it's not something that we naturally do. I know for me, it was definitely something that I had to learn and grow into and am still learning and growing into even as a 32-year-old. But I want to break down vulnerability because I think we get confused. There's two things that I want to talk about today. One is vulnerability, and the second is transparency. I want to focus more on vulnerability today because I think we all do transparency pretty good. Transparency looks like, hey, I'm having a bad day. Can you pray for me? But vulnerability feels like and looks like, this is what I defined it as, capable of being physically or emotionally wounded. And so it's taking a risk of putting all of me out there to be rejected. Vulnerability feels like ownership and exchange, being a mess, amen? We're all a mess, and needing help, risking not knowing the outcome. Meaning, like, I could do vulnerability with Matt. I could bare my soul to Matt, and then Matt could reject me. Matt could walk away and say, that's too much for me. And so the risk of vulnerability feels like, man, I don't actually know the outcome of what's going to happen. And so I'm taking the risk to do this well. It's acknowledging limits, that I have limits and I have needs. And letting God or someone else affect our process. Meaning we actually let them in to affect us. It's so easy to not let people in because we're so fearful of being affected by someone. But the reality is God created us to be affected by others and to be affected by God. Vulnerability is motivated by an authentic desire for help, a longing to receive and contribute to deep connection. So we were created to have deep connection. And so that longing within you to receive and partake in connection stems from doing life in a vulnerable state. Vulnerability sounds like this. I'm in a really hard place. Do you have time for me to share? I'd like your thoughts. So it's risking I'm going to use Pastor Matt as an example the whole time. But Pastor Matt, it's me going to Pastor Matt, which I have done on countless times. Hey, I'm in a really hard place, Matt. Do you have time for me? Like, the risk of that is, what if Matt says, I actually don't have time for you because I have X, Y, and Z. But hey, maybe in a month we can do this. That hurts because I'm risking going to Pastor Matt and saying, hey, like, this is an actual need of mine. Do you have capacity? I'd like your thoughts on what I'm currently going through. So vulnerability is a very fearful, scary thing to do. But the reality is if we're not doing vulnerability, we're not operating the way God created us to operate. And I want to look at the friendship between Jonathan and David because I think it's a beautiful example of the most vulnerable you could possibly live. But first, I want to break down why friendship matters. We were all created for deep connection. Every one of us were created for deep connection, not just with a spouse, not just with a significant other, not with just God alone. We were created for deep connection in the place of friendship. I want to show you the friendship that is filled with vulnerability, one of risk, one of unknown, one of pain and grief, but also one of great joy and fulfillment. And I want to break down their friendship because I think it's important for us to look at this friendship and to build our future friendships around this idea of vulnerability. But who was Jonathan? Jonathan was the son of Saul, who was a very mean man. He was the heir to the throne. And then David was a shepherd, most likely poor, the one who defeated Goliath, Jonathan's best friend, and God's chosen one to take the throne. So Jonathan was supposed to inherit the throne, but God appointed David to be the next king of Israel. And so I believe we see something beautiful in this friendship that God intends for us to find, and nothing is wasted in Scripture. What's the point of God revealing Jonathan and David's friendship if we're not actually supposed to replicate or glean from it? There's no point. There's no need for me to know that Jonathan and David had this amazing friendship that was filled with pain and grief and sorrow if there wasn't actually an idea that I was supposed to gain from this. And so I look at this friendship and I go, man, like God, through like 3 chapters of the Old Testament, reveals this friendship for a reason. It's not wasted. And so today we're going to dive into that friendship, but it starts in 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 4. We're going to be all through 1 Samuel today, but it talks about where their friendship started. And it says this: the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. What does it mean to be knitted to the soul? Like, that's wild. Like, knitted to the soul? Like, that language just confused me sometimes. I'm like, what does that even mean? And I think you have to read through the whole friendship to understand what it actually means to be knitted to the soul of Jonathan and David. But it means to make covenant, to bear one another's burdens to the point of death. And Jonathan's act of vulnerability. So we see them become friends in 1 Samuel 18. And the first thing out of their mouth is like, yo, I'm knitted to the soul with you, bro. Like, what? I don't walk up to like new people and go, hey, my name's Hunter, we're knitted to the soul, all right? We're doing life together. That's weird. Maybe don't do that. If you do that, you're probably gonna be rejected. So sorry. But Jonathan, like I said earlier, was the rightful heir to the throne. That was his inheritance, to receive his father's, when his father died, to become the next king. But Jonathan's act of vulnerability is this. It says in 1 Samuel 18, and Jonathan stripped himself of a robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. Jonathan gave David his robe, his armor, his sword, his bow, and his belt. What does this represent? I want to hear from you. I'm interactive. What does this represent? Those 5 things that Jonathan willingly gave to David.
He's passing his right to David.
Yeah, yes. It wasn't just generosity, although it was. It was a symbolic of surrender. Jonathan acknowledges God's call on David. It is a prophetic act of what is to come. Jonathan is literally giving him the physical things on his body, saying, hey, I see God's call on your life, and I'm not going to fight to take it. Like, what kind of humility does that take? If I'm like about to become the next senior pastor of the Rock Church, God never called me to do that. And someone else comes, what is my prideful self is going to go like, no, like that's my, like I am the guy. Like, what are you doing? That's vulnerable to go, hey, actually, I'm going to take a step back because I acknowledge the God's call on your life. So I'm going to walk in humility and not even fight it. Like, we don't see, maybe internally he was having this battle. We don't know, but we don't see him actually say, like, this is really hard for me to do. We see vulnerability expressed through this reality of, I'm going to forfeit my inheritance as a rightful heir to this kingship. And I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to act in symbolic act and give you these things. Jonathan acknowledges God's call on David's life, and I think that's beautiful because in friendship, it requires that. There are moments in friendship that require us to walk in humility and go, you know what? This is for you. This job, this promotion, this girl, this guy, like, I'm going to step out of the way. And I'm going to act in vulnerability and take a risk of letting you do what I believe is right. Because what if Jonathan missed it? What if it wasn't God's call on David's life for him to be the next king? He doesn't know that. And so we see this beautiful representation of vulnerability. The next thing I want to talk about is that friendship takes risk. And so if you've read this story, you know that Saul hated David. Saul wanted David gone because he knew David is a threat to my throne. And so what does Jonathan do? Jonathan protects David from his father Saul. Jonathan risked being hated by his father to protect David because there was a covenant made between Jonathan and David that he does the right thing even at a personal cost. And so imagine like you're becoming king. Like you're about to be the next king when Saul dies because you're his son. Now your dad hates David because Saul finds out, catches wind that David is going to take his spot. I'm not getting in the way of a hateful man because that means he's probably going to kill me. If he has that much hate in his heart, what makes him think that I'm not going to die? But yet Jonathan goes, I made covenant with David. My soul is knitted to David. And so I'm going to do what's right, and I'm going to protect at whatever cost, at whatever personal cost it is. I'm going to take that. And so he does. He has this conversation with his father, like, why are you trying to kill my bud? Like, he's not bad. Why is this vulnerable? He exposes his heart, not just his opinion. So we see David, he's not just saying, like, Dad, like, come on, just get rid of it. Like, he's actually exposing his heart. He does not argue like a politician. He speaks like a friend. He's having this conversation. Like, come on, guys. Who actually is going to have, like, if I have to have a confrontational conversation, I'll be honest. I'll do transparency because y'all don't get my vulnerability. I had to have a hard conversation with one of our staff who's older than me. And I had to confront them on something they were doing. Praise God, they handled it well. But I had to have this conversation with someone who is quite older than me. And I actually remember talking to Matt about this. And I was like, I have to go talk to this guy. And I did. And it was scary, but it worked. It was amazing. And he loved Jesus. I can't imagine going to a guy that doesn't know Jesus, that's mean and hateful and angry, confronting him on the fact that he's about to kill my best friend. Like, maybe y'all could. I can't. Something else that makes us vulnerable is he can be wounded if Saul rejects him. And later, we find out Saul does. But vulnerability requires letting people see what you actually care about. Like, not just doing friendship. Like, I know some of you guys in this room don't actually do vulnerability. And you just do friendship where you like go hang and the girls paint nails and do whatever they do and go shopping and like kind of be like, did you hear what so-and-so did to so-and-so? And the guys are like doing their thing, talking about the pretty girls. But like, when's the last time you told someone the last time you watched porn? Like, when's the last time you actually bore your soul and said, man, like, porn actually has a grip on my life, and I don't know how to get out of here, but hey, will you help me, lead me to Jesus and find a way out? Vulnerability looks like taking steps of risk, saying, I'm going to bring you into a space of my heart that actually is so scary, so honest, so raw, and I'm going to ask you because I am in need and I need help and I have no way out. Vulnerability doesn't look like talking bad about your friends to one another. That's just sin. And what I want to advocate for, I even said it just a second ago, I don't do vulnerability with you guys. I don't know you. I do vulnerability with Pastor Matt. I do vulnerability with Pastor Rick. I do vulnerability with my girlfriend Ellie. Like, I do vulnerability with people that I've built trust with. This is important to doing vulnerability because if you don't have trust with this person, and then you take a risk and you get hurt, that's not wise. Because then you're like, I'm never doing that again. So what I'm not saying is just willy-nilly do vulnerability with people you don't have trust built with. But what I am saying is that if you're not doing vulnerability with anyone, you're not living. Because there's breakthrough and freedom on the other side of honest conversations. And we see this through the life of David and Jonathan. Biblical vulnerability is not oversharing. What do I mean by oversharing? Can someone give me an example of oversharing?
Is there ever oversharing?
100%. 100%.
Why is that?
What do you think? Any thoughts?
I can't think of something that to the right person something would be oversharing.
I think with trusted friends that you've built equity with, there is no oversharing.
Correct.
Unless it is about someone that they don't need to know about. But like oversharing, what's your name?
Me?
Yeah.
Evan.
Evan. I've never seen Evan a day in my life. If I walked up to Evan and started sharing all the like crazy things that I do behind closed doors where no one sees, that's not wise because Evan doesn't know me. And I don't know how he's going to respond to that. He might be like, yo, dude, that is crazy. I'm calling the police. Like, it's not wise, but I have a therapist. When that door closed, the floodgates of my honesty comes out. Because that's a safe, trusted space where actually things can happen. Exchange can happen. People can actually help me become a better version of me, the more godly version of me. So that's the difference. But I can do transparency with him. I can say, hey, me and my girlfriend Ellie had a hard conversation. Can you pray for me? The way I would do it with Pastor Matt is I go, hey, me and Ellie argued about blah, 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 and I really don't like her right now. Can you help me? That's different, right? Two different things, both very needed, both very necessary. I don't do this with very many people. I do this with anyone who asks. Another example that I like to use is like, you come to my house, and I have my blinds open, you can see in. You can see that I have a couch, that I have a really wonderful dog. You can see my decorations. You can see how messy it is right now. You can see into my house. Anyone can that walks by. But not everyone can come into my door because it's locked, right? But I can see in. I can see the different areas of our life. But if I decide, if Pastor Matt Evan. If Evan knocks on my door, I'm going to open and be like, yo, what are you doing here? He's like, I saw you have a couch. I was like, yeah, good job. But if Pastor Matt knocks on my door, I'm like, yo, what's up, bro? Why are you here? Come in. That's the difference between vulnerability and transparency. Is that anyone can see in. I'm willing to let anyone see in, but I'm not willing to let everyone come into the home of my heart. And that's good. People who are telling you to share everything with everyone, tell them to shut up. It's not wise. I went off on a tangent, and I'm so sorry. Friendship is tested by honest conflict. How many of you have had conflict with friends, and now you don't talk to that friend? None of y'all had arguments with friends that come on, you all went through high school. Don't act shy. But friendship is tested in honest conflict. In 1 Samuel 20, we see that Jonathan believes Saul will not be killed by David. And David is convinced that he is going to die because Saul has told him and tried to kill him. And so David is fleeing for his life, and Jonathan's like, yo, bro, like, come on, my dad would have told me if he's going to kill you. And I just had a conversation with my dad, and he says he's not going to kill you. And so there you see this, like, holy argument happening between Jonathan and David, where they're arguing whether I'm going to die or not going to die. And David's like, I'm going to die. David says, yet as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there is only one step between me and death. And so we see this like argument happening. They disagree deeply. David says there's no way I'll survive. Jonathan says if my father's going to kill you, he would have already told me. And they can't agree. But they get to the point where Jonathan's like, yo, I got you. I'm going to go home, and then you're not going to show up to dinner, and then my dad's going to ask where you are, and if he says he's going to kill you, I'll send this arrow to this spot. If he says he isn't going to kill you, I'll send this arrow to this spot, and then we'll flee. And so honest conversations are hard and vulnerable. They're not easy. It's not easy to disagree. But honest conflict leads to conflict resolution. And if you can do vulnerability in the place of hard conversations, the reality is if you're committed to friendship and to not being prideful and to doing vulnerability when someone hurts you, say, hey, Pastor Matt, the way you called me special really hurt my feelings. Can you help me understand why you called me special? I'm being funny, but it's true. Rather than going to Pastor Matt and be like, you freaking called me special and I want nothing to do with you. That's easier. For me to have this space where I'm like, yo, Matt, you pissed me off and I'm done. It's very different than me having to bring Matt my honest heart and go, hey, this really hurt. The way you talked about me. This person said you said this behind my back. Why did you do that? Can you help me understand? Staying in the place of curiosity and conflict actually leads to resolution rather than coming before Matt and going, Baba, you did this and I don't want you in my life anymore. That's what we see with Jonathan and David in this reality of David's about to die by Jonathan's father, Saul. And they're kind of having this holy argument of like, man, but that takes vulnerability for David to stand his ground and be like, no, I'm going to die. And it takes vulnerability for Jonathan to be like, they were both being honest. And we see later that, yeah, Saul was trying to kill David. And in the end of their friendship, we see this beautiful thing where David mourns publicly. So if you don't know the story, Saul and Paul. That's different. That's a different story. Jonathan go to battle with the Philistines. They're both killed. Both die. David makes it alive. Praise God. Because David was the one that God anointed for the throne. But what we don't see of Jonathan is Jonathan being like, I'm not going to war. I know I'm going to die. So we see even in the midst of this crazy, Saul is out to kill his best friend. He knows he shouldn't go to battle because he's going to die. Yet he honors his father and he does what his father asks. Even if there's a grudge, even if there's hatred or bitterness, he doesn't allow those things to dictate his decisions. He goes, you know what? I'm going to honor my father and I'm going to do what he asks of me. And then they both die. But what we see in 1 Samuel 20, down here, is that when he dies, David doesn't go, frick, yeah, I'm the king now. I did what I was supposed to. I hid, I fled, I went away, I didn't get killed. What do we see of David? David grieves publicly. As a future king, David could not have stayed composed or David could have stayed politically strategic and composed. Instead, he weeps, he fasts, he writes a lament meant to be remembered and sung. Vulnerability means letting pain be seen. Like when something actually hurts me, when my father dies, or when my brother or best friend hurts me or is sick. I remember one time, I'll be honest, I had this best friend growing up, and he had cancer and was terminal, gonna die. And our last week we ever were friends, I drove with him to the hospital in DC, spent a week at the kids cancer hospital in DC. And we had the best time. He did all the fun things he wanted to do before he died. I went with him. It was awful to see him in that much pain. And so I decided on my way home, I'm not going to be his friend anymore. Because I can't bear the pain of losing him to death. I just can't. Guess what? He's still alive. And guess what? We're not friends. Because I wasn't willing to do the vulnerability to the point of pain and grief and losing my friend. And now I look back and praise God, he forgives me. But we're not buds anymore. And he's lonely. But I chose my comfort and fear of vulnerability and pain and grief because I was not willing to go through losing my friend to death. Like, that's not okay. We see here that David and Jonathan do this beautiful thing in friendship. They live vulnerable. They live out pain and grief. They live out great conflict. They get through it. They press on. It doesn't say they were happy and joyful the whole time. We actually don't see much of joy in any of the story. And so I wonder if God is using this story to let us know friendship's not all butterflies and candy canes and cupcakes. But friendship looks like grieving with one another, bearing each other's burden, doing vulnerability to the point of death and losing someone. I pray that no one ever has to go through that because it sucks. Later, I have the same story. A few years ago, friend gets sick. I choose to stay. I choose to stay and do friendship. Friend dies. Worst pain I have ever experienced. Best friend, we have the same tattoo on our arm. Had to bury him. I chose to stay. And I'm grateful. I look back at that friendship and I miss him more than I could miss anyone. But I look back and go, man, I stuck through till the day he died because I was willing to do pain. I was willing to do grief. I was willing to do vulnerability and let people in on my pain. And so I invite you to do friendship in that regard. It's easier to do surface level friendships that require nothing. You're in your group text, you send photos, you send memes, you do your thing, and the itch on your heart of friendship gets scratched a little bit. But breakthroughs on the other side of deep connection with people you're willing to do vulnerability with. What I love about David is he refuses to rush the grief. David does not explain away his grief spiritually. He does not minimize it with cliches. He sits in it, and he gives sorrow words. That is emotional and spiritual maturity. If you're not willing to do pain and grief, I would question if you're actually as spiritual and emotionally mature as you think you are. If you're not willing to go through the pain of grief and losing something, then I'm curious if you should do some time with God, letting him search your heart. Because I think there's something beautiful on the other side of it. I went through an incredible season of pain and grief where I had to relive. I did trauma therapy. I don't suggest that for any weak human being. But I had to go through trauma therapy for some abuse that I experienced as a child and into my teenage years. And for 20 years, I avoided it. I was like, nah, dude, I am not touching that with a 10-foot pole. God has forgiven me. God has set me free. God is all joy, butterflies, and happy things. But one time, I had this dream. And sometimes God speaks to us in dreams, and I would say, be listening. And I had this dream, and in the dream, God brought me. I was a little boy, and I was in this this path, and there was trees all around us, and me and God, we're just walking down this path. And the path got to this point where it broke into two. And there was a sign on one side that said grief and sorrow, and there was the other side that said temporary happiness. And God led me to this path, and he says, which one do you want? I'll take you down either. But I'm with you with whatever one you choose. And I was like, well, I'm not choosing that one. That one sucks. So maybe I should choose this one, but it said temporary happiness. And I knew it wouldn't lead to breakthrough or joy. And so some courage came upon me in the dream, and I decided to go down the path of grief and sorrow. And at the end of the path was a well, like a water well. I have a southern accent sometimes, so some people don't know what I mean by that. Like the thing you put a bucket in and get water out. There was a well down there, and there was a bucket, and the Lord said, let's go down together. And I did, and I woke up. And I was like, oh no. I woke up in that dream, I was like, oh gosh, no, like I'm about to have to go to grief and sorrow, and that is something I have fought for 20 years. And again, in the natural, courage came upon me, and I decided to do trauma therapy. Now, my story is one of intense abuse. I don't share it publicly because it's not needed. If you want to know privately, I will tell you my story. It was insanely hard for me to have to do vulnerability. I remember sitting with Kendrian, our worship leader, in his office the day before it started. I did this while I was here. This happened like 6 months ago, maybe. It was a 6-month process, so like started last January and went for 6 months. And I had to do vulnerability with friends. To literally to the point where I said, hey, like, I need you to call me to make sure I'm out of bed. Because this sorrow, this pain, this grief that I'm experiencing is keeping me in my bed for days on days end. And I need you to check in on me to make sure I'm getting out of the bed and like eating. How many of you know that takes risk? To ask someone to call and check on you because you're going through it. I didn't want to go there. But because I did, guys, I am like, please, for the love of God, go through the pain and grief. The other side is beautiful. It sucked going through it. It was painful. It was hard. I had to talk about things that I never wanted to bring up again. God brought me back to memories that I had shoved so far down that there was no way I was fighting that thing. And he led me to the well of joy. But it was on the other side of grief and sorrow. And so vulnerability requires something for you to take risks, to do something you don't really want to do. No one actually really wants to live a vulnerable life. But it is the thing that brings joy. Because we see the final picture of vulnerability in their friendship. When Jonathan dies, David responds with lament that is deep, honest, and vulnerable. And this is what David says to Jonathan after he dies. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. What does that mean? A lot of y'all's generation and these crazy Californians want to say that Jonathan and David were gay. They use this as an example to make space for their, how do I say this? Agenda. That's a kind way to say it. I was thinking of a much more mean way to say it. It pushes their agenda. But what I know to be true about Jonathan and David is that this is an example that God created you and knit you in your mother's womb for vulnerable friendship with the same sex. And I'm not giving permission for you to be gay. Please, for the love of God, don't be gay. It's sinful. Maybe take this out of the video. But this is permission for you to get your needs met in vulnerable friendship with male and female friends. This is an example of what true friendship is actually meant to be like. You have a need for co-ed friendships. That's a need. But greater than that need, God created you to need deep, vulnerable, honest, no strings attached. All the doors are open to my heart. Come on in. Friendships. Why does this matter? God created us with a need for brotherhood, sisterhood, covenant friendships, people who know us deeply and walk with us faithfully. A spouse cannot fulfill every relational need. Romantic love was never meant to replace friendship. It was meant to exist alongside of it. If David, a warrior, a king after God's own heart, needed this kind of friendship, then I believe we do too. Deep friendships of the same sex are not optional. They're God-given need. I'm just going to read the rest of the notes because I'm going long. When we neglect them, we feel isolated. When we avoid vulnerability, we stay shallow. But when we pursue covenant friendships, we experience the kind of connection God designed us for. This is the kind of friendship that costs something, and this is the kind of friendship that gives a life and life abundantly. It costs comfort, it costs control, it costs certainty. But it gives you depth, it gives you formation, it gives you healing, and a glimpse of the way God designed us to live together. This is actually the kind of friendship God invites us to. And so my charge to you today is this: if you don't have friendships like that, ask God to reveal who can you give to me, God, that would fulfill this need of my heart. God's not seated on the throne being like, hey, buddy, you got to figure it out. Like, the reality is that if we actually bring the deepest need of our heart, which is community, fellowship, belonging, longing, to God and ask him to help, he will lead you to the right path. He will lead you to people. And yeah, you might get hurt along the way. Good luck. But you can make it. I told you 2 situations where, one, I walked away from a deep friendship because I was afraid of losing him to death. And I told you about a friend that I lost to death that I stayed with. Let's be ones who stay. Let's be ones who stay through pain, through hardship, through joy, through tension, through conflict. And I promise you, your heart will be so much more satisfied. In my teenage and young 20s, I wanted my friend group to be as large as it possibly could be. That every day, every night, someone would hang out with me because the friend group was so big that no one could tell me no. At least one person could hang out if my friend group was like 50 people. Now my friend group is like this. It's much smaller, much deeper, and I'm way more satisfied and fulfilled, even on the nights where loneliness sets in, because no one can hang out with me, and I want to be around people. I'm a people. Like, I'm still so much more satisfied and fulfilled because I've risked doing vulnerability with my friends. And even when I'm not understood or heard, I'm still fulfilled.